The land that is now Redstone Arsenal has been home to many different people, from native tribes to the current residents, the U.S. Army to numerous space and defense agencies. In this hometown history, we invite you to take a journey through the diverse history of the Arsenal and catch a glimpse of its bright future. From the 1630s to the 1770s, Madison County was home to several different native tribes, the Chickasaw, the Creek, and the Cherokee. These nations likely shared the land, with no singular tribe occupying it. They shared the area with over 800 known plants and animals. Plants were used as food, medicine, and crafts of all kinds. They grew corn, also known as maize, beans, peas, pumpkins, strawberries, tobacco, potatoes, squash, and gourds. Trees were used to build and cover their homes, and the bark was used for medicine and as fibers for making string for clothing. Animals were used for food, clothing, and shelter. Animal bones found at Redstone include catfish, squirrels, various species of birds, possums, boars, and rabbits. In a series of land cession deals with the United States government beginning around 1802, the majority of native peoples were removed from North Alabama to create federally governed areas such as Madison County. The Cherokee, Creek, and Chickasaw were moved en masse through what became known as the Trail of Tears before settling in Indian Territory, now known as modern-day Oklahoma. After the American Revolution ended in 1783, the United States began rapidly expanding. Settlers migrated south and west as new land became available for purchase. The area that is now Redstone Arsenal had some of the most fertile lands in the region, attracting many people. On August 30th, 1809, one of the first settlers to buy land was an Irish immigrant named Thomas Freeman. He didn't live on the land, however. Freeman served as the chief land surveyor in Madison County for decades. Described as a highly trustworthy by his contemporaries, Freeman's work is still used today. In July of 1820, Freeman sold all his land to Francis Anderson for $2,000, and the sale was finalized by Stephen Neal, one of the first attorneys in Madison County. There are many more instances like this one that comprise the history of Redstone's early settlement. Before the Civil War, many enslaved Africans worked the lands of the plantations which made up the land of Redstone Arsenal. After the Civil War ended and the Emancipation Proclamation was put into effect, the large plantations on the arsenal fell apart and were broken into smaller parcels of land. Newly emancipated slaves were free to build lives for themselves. Two major communities, Pond Beat and Mullins Flat, sprang up and became home to over 600 families. In Pond Beat, more than half of the families living there were land-owning African Americans. The parcel each family owned was about 20 acres apiece. They grew crops and raised livestock, never enough to sell at the market, just enough for their families to survive on. Prior to the Civil War, the land that became Redstone Arsenal was home to people from all walks of life. The fertile landscape of Madison County made farming, particularly cotton, profitable. Property documents in the collection of Madison County archives show James Manning used the money he made from farming to purchase a large portion of land in 1818, and the land stayed in his family until 1845, when he sold it off to pay family debts. In 1845, Luke Matthews purchased a massive area of land to build Oakendale Plantation, one of Madison County's largest plantations. By 1860, Oakendale was valued at $50,000, over $1 million today. And Matthews himself had a personal net worth of $150,000, approximately $5 million today. While most people think of large plantations like this during the antebellum period, a plantation of this size actually represented the minority of land ownership. The Civil War devastated Madison County's economy, and it took several years for the county to recover. Poor white and black Alabamians sought new ways to grow crops and provide for themselves and their families. During this time of Reconstruction, the tenant farming system emerged. Tenant farming is a system where a landowner provides land and money to grow crops, and the farmers work on the land and pay rent to live on it in exchange for money or a share of the crop grown. After emancipation, many black individuals, roughly 10% of the black population in the Tennessee Valley, migrated away from the South. The combination of migration and the move of laborers into industrial mills resulted in an agriculture labor shortage. Without the necessary labor to work farms, land values depreciated, and agricultural income became almost non-existent. Landowners quickly realized that laborers must be recovered to work the land and invited freedmen back as paid workers, with varying outcomes. Conditions for workers had not that much improved regardless of their skin color, and landowners did not have any extra money to pay hired workers. Hence, sharecropping became popular among freedmen and later to the poor white populace. U.S. Census records from 1900 show Madison County had hundreds of tenancy farms, several of which were located on the present-day Redstone Arsenal. Sharecropping became the way of life for a lot of people on the future lands, and for the next 60 years until the U.S. Army bought the property in 1941. In May 1941, 2 years after World War II began, and several months before the U.S. entered the War Department announced its decision to build 3 facilities in Huntsville, Alabama, to make supplies to support a growing army and to manufacture and make countermeasures for chemical warfare. Production began in 1942. Employees of Huntsville Arsenal and Redstone Ordnance Plant received the Army-Navy Production E Award, recognizing their hard work and contribution to the war effort. During this time, the arsenal employed over 19,000 people. Prior to the purchase by the Army, the land was mostly farmland. The acreage was occupied by several farming communities like Pond Beat and Mullins Flat. The government essentially bought out these small farming communities, and the 550 families living there had to move. With very short notice, roughly 6,000 men, women, and children, 76% of which were black, had to leave a place many had spent decades in. The sale was announced in May 1941, and some had to move as early as July and August, making it a very tight turnaround. To compound this issue of their homes disappearing, consider that most of these communities consisted of sharecroppers and tenant farmers. They had very little to subsist on in the first place, then they had to find a new place to live. This is just one example in the coming years of a governing body literally moving an entire community of people to satisfy government projects. After World War II ended in 1945, the country refocused to military reduction. Huntsville's military facilities closed in 1947, and the land was used by several private companies. In 1949, the facilities consolidated and officially reopened as Redstone Arsenal, a center for rocket science and production. The first major project developed during this time was a surface-to-surface missile with a range of over 500 miles, known as the Redstone. From the 1950s onward, technological development attracted the sharpest minds in the United States and Europe. This included Wernher von Braun and his team of German scientists who developed the Redstone rocket and popularized ideas of space expeditions. Today, Redstone Arsenal occupies over 38,000 acres of Madison County. In the next few years, the Federal Bureau of Investigation is building a headquarters on the arsenal to be used as a second headquarters outside of their building in Washington, D.C. It will be made up of 6 buildings, 3 of which are already under construction. And in 2021, the Department of the Air Force decided that Redstone Arsenal would be the new home of U.S. Space Command. Exciting times are ahead.